The archaeologist's trowel struck something that shouldn't exist. A bronze spearhead weighing 15 pounds. July 2005, Tel Gath excavation site. Dr. R.N. Mayer brushed away 3,000 years of dust. Metal rang against stone. His hand froze. The spearhead stretched longer than his arm. Bronze corroded green with age gleamed in the harsh Israeli sun. This wasn't meant for any human warrior. The excavation team gathered around the impossible artifact. 9 feet of corroded bronze shaft emerged from the earth. Someone whispered the name everyone was thinking. Goliath, the biblical giant who terrorized Israel's armies. The Philistine champion from this very city. But giants were myths. Stories, not real. Then they found the armor. Bronze scales thick as roof tiles. A helmet that could shelter a child. Each piece matched the spearhead's impossible scale. The team worked in stunned silence. Dust hissed through cracks in the ancient stonework. Their brushes revealed more bronze, more evidence of something that couldn't be. The gate stones began to shift. 3,000 years of pressure had weakened the massive blocks. Someone shouted a warning. The ancient gateway of Gath, the same gates Goliath once defended, groaned and collapsed. Tons of limestone crashed down, revealing a chamber sealed since the Bronze Age. Inside lay the proof that would shake archaeology to its core. But how did identical giant legends emerge in cultures separated by oceans and millennia? And why does every major discovery of giant remains vanish from the archaeological record? These aren't comfortable questions. They lead to darker truths about what ancient civilizations feared so deeply they tried to erase it from memory. To understand why these 10 terrifying giants were erased from history, we must rewind to humanity's oldest nightmares, starting with the beings so monstrous that even the gods demanded their destruction. Genesis chapter 6 contains exactly 4 verses that the Vatican spent centuries trying to explain away. They describe beings so wrong, so fundamentally broken, that God himself regretted creating humanity. The text begins simply enough. There were giants in the earth in those days. The Hebrew word is Nephilim. It means the fallen ones. But fallen from what? The next line provides the answer that made church fathers sweat. When the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. Sons of God, daughters of men. The language draws a line between 2 species that should never have crossed. The ancient Jewish texts are more explicit. The Book of Enoch describes these sons of God as watchers, divine beings who abandoned their posts in heaven. They taught humanity forbidden knowledge, weapon-making, sorcery, the cutting of roots. Their children inherited more than just size. The text uses a word that appears nowhere else in Scripture: Gibborim, mighty ones, heroes of old, men of renown. But heroes don't make God regret creation. The Genesis account turns dark fast. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth. The Nephilim consumed everything. Ancient texts describe them devouring entire harvests. When crops ran out, they ate livestock. When animals ran out, they turned on humans. The Book of Jubilees records their cannibalism in stark detail. Blood soaked into soil that would never grow clean again. Their size defied nature. The Book of Enoch lists specific measurements. 3,000 ells tall, that's 4,500 feet. Obviously impossible. But even if the texts exaggerate by a factor of 100, we're still talking about beings 45 feet tall. The square-cube law of physics says bones that size would shatter under their own weight, unless their bones weren't quite human. The archaeological silence around the Nephilim speaks volumes. We've found dinosaur bones 65 million years old. We've uncovered human ancestors from 3 million years back. But beings that supposedly lived just before recorded history? Nothing. Not one confirmed Nephilim skeleton exists in any museum. The absence feels deliberate. Ancient flood myths span the globe: Sumerian, Babylonian, Greek, Hindu, Native American. They all share core elements: divine beings angry at corruption, one family warned, an ark or boat, animals saved. But only the Hebrew version explicitly states why the flood came. The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. That violence had a source: the Nephilim. God's solution was total extinction. Every living thing that breathed air would drown. The flood wasn't about rain or human sin. It was targeted genocide against hybrid beings that should never have existed. But the Nephilim survived the flood, and here's the proof embedded in Scripture itself. Numbers chapter 13 tells of 12 spies sent to scout Canaan. They returned terrified. We saw the Nephilim there. The same word, the same giants. Centuries after the flood, supposedly destroyed them all. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. The spies named specific Nephilim descendants: the Anakim, 3 clans, Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai. They occupied fortified cities with walls that reached the sky. Deuteronomy adds details about their beds. King Og of Bashan slept in an iron bed 13 feet long. Iron, not wood, built to support inhuman weight. Joshua's conquest of Canaan reads differently when you realize what they were fighting. The Israelites were commanded to destroy entire cities. No survivors, no prisoners, no mercy. The brutality makes sense only if those cities harbored something more dangerous than enemy soldiers. What the Dead Sea Scrolls revealed changes everything about how we read these accounts. Cave 4 at Qumran preserved texts the mainstream Bible excludes. The Book of Giants, thought lost for 2,000 years, survived in fragments. It tells the Nephilim's side of the story. They knew the flood was coming. They had dreams of drowning, of trees submerged, of gardens washed away. The giants begged their Watcher fathers to intercede with God. The answer was no. But some found another way to survive. The text hints at Nephilim seeking refuge in deep places: caves, caverns, underground cities where floodwaters couldn't reach. They emerged after the waters receded, fewer in number but still alive. Still hungry. Still wrong. Church Father Irenaeus wrote something curious in the 2nd century. He claimed certain Gnostic sects worshipped the Nephilim as true humans, while viewing normal people as inferior creations. These sects possessed texts describing Nephilim ritual practices. The Church burned those texts, every copy. The question is, why writings about ancient giants threatened Christian authority enough to warrant complete destruction? Ethiopian Orthodox tradition preserves details other churches discarded. Their version of Enoch describes Nephilim technology: flying vehicles, weapons that could level mountains, knowledge that corrupted human development. They teach that the flood wasn't just about destroying giants, it was about resetting human civilization before we learned too much too fast. Modern UFO theorists love this material. They've twisted ancient texts to support alien hypotheses, but the original sources are stranger than any ancient astronaut theory. The Watchers weren't aliens. They were something far more disturbing: divine beings who chose corruption, who looked at human women and felt desire, who fathered children that reality itself rejected. The violence of the Nephilim echoes through Scripture: Goliath taunting Israel's armies, the Anakim forcing Moses to send spies, Og of Bashan ruling from his iron fortress. Each story shares common elements: impossible size, supernatural strength, contempt for normal humans, and always, always, complete destruction when finally defeated. If the Nephilim were truly destroyed, then explain what the 12 Israelite spies saw in Canaan: beings so massive that the scouts described themselves as grasshoppers in their own eyes, setting the stage for a 40-year delay that would cost an entire generation their promised land. 12 battle-hardened warriors returned from their scouting mission white-faced and shaking. 10 of them refused to enter the land they'd spent 40 years marching toward. The reason stood 30 feet tall. Moses had chosen his best men, leaders from each tribe, warriors who'd survived Egyptian slavery, desert wandering, and constant warfare. These weren't easily frightened soldiers, yet their voices cracked as they delivered their report. The land devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. The Hebrew text preserves their exact words. They saw the Nephilim, the same giants God had supposedly drowned in the flood. But these weren't waterlogged corpses. They walked. They built. They ruled cities with walls so high that Hebrew slaves who'd constructed pyramids called them Impossible. The spies named names. 3 brothers controlled Hebron, Sheshai, Ahiman, and Talmai. The word Anakim literally means long-necked ones. Their heads scraped ceilings built for giants. Their necks stretched above normal architectural limits. Every doorway, every hall, every public space in their cities accommodated inhuman proportions. Caleb and Joshua stood apart from the terrified 10. They'd seen the same giants, walked the same streets, measured themselves against the same impossible warriors. But Caleb did something that reveals either supreme faith or detailed intelligence. He specifically requested Hebron as his inheritance, the city of giants, the stronghold of the 3 brothers. A soldier doesn't claim the enemy's strongest fortress unless he knows something others don't. The archaeological evidence from Hebron disturbs modern researchers. Massive stone blocks form the foundation of structures far older than Israeli occupation. The blocks weigh tons each. They're fitted without mortar and construction techniques that mirror sites like Baalbek and Sacsayhuaman. Gates wide enough for beings 3 times human height. Doorways that make no sense for normal occupation. Numbers chapter 13 contains a genealogical bombshell that most readers miss. We saw the Nephilim there. The descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim, direct lineage. The Anakim weren't just tall humans. They carried bloodlines that traced back to the pre-flood giants, the sons of God, the fallen ones, the beings that made God regret creation. The 10 spies' terror infected the entire nation. We can't attack those people. They're stronger than we are. The Hebrew word for stronger also means more firm or more established. The Anakim had ruled Canaan for centuries. They'd built fortress cities, developed agricultural systems that supported massive caloric needs, created a civilization where normal humans served as food sources. That night, Israel wept. They'd rather return to Egyptian slavery than face the Anakim. They talked of stoning Moses and Aaron, choosing new leaders, walking back into bondage rather than forward into a land of giants. Their rebellion earned 40 years of desert wandering. An entire generation would die before Israel found the courage to face what waited in Canaan. But something changed during those 40 years. The Anakim grew weaker. Their numbers dwindled. When Joshua finally led Israel across the Jordan, the giants who'd terrified seasoned warriors fell before farmers and shepherds. The text offers no explanation for this reversal, unless you read between the lines. Deuteronomy preserves Moses' final instructions. The Emites used to live there, a people strong and numerous, and as tall as the Anakites. Like the Anakites, they too were considered Rephaites, past tense, used to live, were considered. Something had already begun destroying the giant races before Israel arrived. The pattern repeats across Canaan. The Zamzamites, giants who lived near Ammon, destroyed. The Horites, giants in Seir, eliminated. The Avites, giants near Gaza, gone. Each giant clan fell to human populations just before Israel's conquest, as if something was clearing the path, preparing the way, ensuring the Anakim would stand alone when judgment arrived. Joshua's campaign against the Anakim reads like systematic genocide. At that time, Joshua went and destroyed the Anakites from the hill country, from Hebron, Debir, and Anab, from all the hill country of Judah, and from all the hill country of Israel. No negotiations, no prisoners, no survivors. The text emphasizes completeness. Total destruction. Entire cities burned to prevent reoccupation. The book of Joshua lists specific height measurements for conquered giants. The bed of Og, king of Bashan, 13.5 feet long, 6 feet wide. Made of iron to support weight that would shatter wood, displayed in Rabbah as a war trophy, proof that the impossible had been killed. Caleb's conquest of Hebron provides the most detail. At 85 years old, he personally led the assault on the 3 Anakim brothers. Sheshai fell first, then Ahiman, finally Talmai. The text treats these as individual combat victories, not battlefield casualties. An elderly Hebrew warrior defeating 30-foot giants in single combat, unless Caleb knew their weakness. Ancient Jewish commentaries suggest the Anakim suffered from genetic degradation. Each generation grew weaker than the last. The hybrid vigor that created the Nephilim couldn't sustain itself. Bones became brittle. Minds grew slow. The giants who'd terrified Moses' spies were shadows of their ancestors, still massive, still strong, but no longer invincible. The archaeological gap frustrates researchers. We find Canaanite pottery, Egyptian scarabs, Philistine temples, but no giant skeletons, no oversized weapons, no architectural remains clearly built for 30-foot inhabitants. The absence feels intentional, as if Joshua's forces didn't just kill the Anakim, they erased them, destroyed evidence, scattered bones, ensured future generations would dismiss giant accounts as mythology. Israeli archaeologist Yigal Yadin excavated Hazor in the 1950s. He found a destruction layer dating to Joshua's conquest. The burning was total, temperatures that melted mud bricks, heat that fused pottery, destruction beyond military necessity, the kind of fire you use when you're not just defeating an enemy, you're purifying a contamination. But Joshua's genocide failed. The text admits this in a single devastating verse. No Anakites were left in Israelite territory. Only in Gaza, Gath and Ashdod did any remain. 3 cities, 3 refuges, 3 seeds of future terror. The Anakim who escaped found shelter among the Philistines. The sea peoples who'd migrated from Crete accepted the giants Hebrew warriors rejected, gave them positions of honor, made them champions, bred them into their royal lines. The mixture of Philistine military technology and Anakim size would create Israel's greatest individual enemy. Rabbinic tradition preserves details the biblical text omits. The fleeing Anakim carried artifacts, weapons sized for giant hands, armor that no human could wear, knowledge of pre-flood metallurgy. They established forges in their new cities, trained apprentices, prepared for the day when they'd face Israel again. The Philistines weren't fools. They recognized the Anakim's value as psychological weapons. A single giant champion could demoralize entire armies, make enemies surrender without fighting. The 3 cities became breeding centers, selective marriages to preserve giant traits while adding Philistine cunning. 400 years passed. Israel forgot the terror of the Anakim. New generations heard stories of Joshua's victories, but never faced giants themselves. They grew comfortable, abandoned the vigilance that had allowed their ancestors to destroy impossible enemies, started believing their own propaganda, that giants were just tall men. The last Anakim fled to 3 cities, Gath, Gaza, and Ashdod. 4 centuries later, from Gath emerged a warrior whose name still makes children shudder. His height matched the ancient measurements. His weapons defied human strength. His challenge echoed across the valley of Elah, where 2 armies would freeze in terror, setting the stage for a shepherd boy to face the last son of the giants. The bronze coat found at Tel Gath weighs 125 pounds. Military historians calculated that whoever wore it stood at minimum 9.5 feet tall. The armor scales overlap like dragon skin, each piece thicker than a man's thumb. Forged with techniques lost since the Bronze Age, Dr. Aaron Mayer lifted the first scale with both hands. His team had excavated pottery, weapons, household goods, normal artifacts from 3,000 years ago. Then they hit the armor layer. Bronze gleamed green through centuries of corrosion. The coverage area suggested a chest broader than most doorways. The spearhead alone could have served as a sword for normal men. Israeli museums display ancient weapons behind thick glass. Swords, daggers, arrowheads. The Gath spearhead required structural support, 15 pounds of bronze shaped for thrusting. The socket where the shaft attached could fit a man's wrist. Metallurgists analyzed the alloy. The bronze contained tin ratios impossible to achieve with ancient furnaces, unless those furnaces were larger than any yet discovered. The archaeological team worked in grid patterns across Tel Gath, each squared meter carefully documented. Brushes whisked away dirt grain by grain. On July 27, 2005, a student's trowel clicked against pottery. Not unusual at a Philistine site, but this shard bore 2 names that changed everything. The Goliath ostracon emerged from the earth like an accusation. Ancient Philistine script etched into clay. Two names, Alwat and Welt. Linguistic analysis confirmed what archaeologists feared to suggest. Both names derived from the Indo-European root that gave us Goliath. The pottery dated to the 10th century BCE, David's era. Found in the destruction layer of the city, Goliath called home. Names carved in clay outlast bronze and bone. The Ostracan proved someone named Goliath lived in Gath during David's time. Not mythology, not exaggeration, historical fact preserved in fired clay. But Goliath had a brother with 6 fingers on each hand. 2 Samuel chapter 21 names him Ishbi-Benob. The text describes his spear weighing 300 shekels of bronze, half of Goliath's 600, still impossible for normal warriors. He wore new armor when he cornered David in battle. The aging king couldn't lift his sword. Abishai arrived just as the giant's spear descended. The 6-fingered warrior fell, but 3 more brothers remained. Saph died at Gob, another giant from Gath's warrior caste. Then Goliath's actual brother appeared. The Hebrew text creates confusion here. Some manuscripts name him Lachmi. Others call him another Goliath. Elhanan killed this giant whose spear shaft matched the infamous weaver's rod description. 4 brothers, 4 champions, 4 products of whatever breeding program Gath maintained. The 4th brother defied classification even among giants. 6 fingers on each hand, 6 toes on each foot, 24 digits total. The mutation that marks genetic instability, inbreeding to preserve size while sacrificing health. Jonathan, David's nephew, cut him down at Gath, the last of the 4 brothers who'd terrorized Israel's armies. Scripture preserves exact measurements. Goliath stood 6 cubits and a span. Using the standard 18-inch cubit, that's 9 feet 9 inches. The longer royal cubit yields 11 feet. His coat of scale armor weighed 5,000 shekels. 125 pounds of bronze worn like clothing. The iron spearhead weighed 600 shekels, 15 pounds of killing metal. Ancient armies understood psychological warfare. Champions fought between battle lines while soldiers watched. Victory meant more than killing one enemy. It broke the opposing force's will. Goliath's morning ritual lasted 40 days. He strode between the armies, voice booming across the valley, bronze armor catching sunrise, every step calculated to inspire terror. The real question isn't how David killed him. It's why Goliath challenged Israel at all. Philistine military doctrine favored naval raids and fortified cities. They possessed iron weapons while Israel used bronze. Superior technology should have guaranteed victory without single combat. But Goliath insisted on personal challenge. Morning and evening for 40 days. Taunting, waiting, daring Israel to produce a champion who could stand against Gath's giant. Rabbinic commentary suggests Goliath knew something modern readers miss. The giant bloodlines were failing. Each generation grew weaker. Genetic load accumulated. Mutations like his 6-fingered brother revealed the decay. Goliath represented the last pure expression of Anakim heritage. His death would end an era. Perhaps he sought a worthy ending. A final proof that giants once ruled the earth. David's weapons tell their own story. 5 smooth stones from the valley stream, a shepherd's sling, tools for driving predators from flocks. The boy refused Saul's armor, too heavy, too restrictive. Speed would matter more than protection. The sling bullet found the one gap in Goliath's armor, the forehead below the helmet line. Bronze rang against stone as 9 feet of warrior collapsed. The aftermath revealed Philistine terror. Their champion's death sent armies fleeing. Not tactical retreat, panicked rout. They understood what Israel didn't. Goliath was irreplaceable. The last perfect giant. His brothers might stand as tall, but none combined size, skill, and mental clarity like the fallen champion. David kept trophies. Goliath's sword went to the tabernacle at Nob. Later, fleeing from Saul, David reclaimed it. "There is none like it," he told the priest. The sword designed for giant hands became a symbol, proof that impossible enemies could fall. That faith could overcome genetic advantage. Gath's response to losing 5 giant warriors reveals strategic desperation. They stopped producing champions. No more giants emerged from Philistine cities. The bloodline that traced back to the Anakim ended on Israel's swords. Archaeological evidence from Gath shows rapid cultural change after this period. New burial practices, different pottery styles, as if the city reinvented itself after losing its defining advantage. Modern excavations at Tel Gath continue revealing oversized artifacts. Doorways too tall for normal use, stairs with steps that strain average legs, architecture designed for inhabitants who look down on normal humans. The city's very bones remember its giants. Dr. Mayer's team uncovered one final detail that haunts archaeological conferences. Beneath Goliath-era destruction layers, they found older ruins, massive foundations, stones that match the Cyclopean construction at other ancient sites. Gath wasn't built for giants, it was built by them. Layer upon layer of oversized architecture stretching back to periods archaeology can't adequately date. The Philistines inherited something ancient when they welcomed fleeing Anakim: knowledge, bloodlines, technology. They managed this inheritance for centuries, produced champions when needed, maintained the giant genome through careful breeding, until David's reign ended their program in blood. The biblical account emphasizes complete destruction, all 4 brothers dead, no mention of giant children, no wives, no continuation, as if the writers wanted to assure readers that this threat had ended. That Goliath's line was extinct, that Israel could sleep without fearing giant footsteps. But north of Gath, across the Jordan, a kingdom of giants endured. While Israel celebrated Goliath's fall, in Bashan a king measured his bed at 13 feet, because he was the last of something far older and far worse. Deuteronomy records only one piece of furniture in the entire Old Testament. Not Solomon's throne, not the ark itself, a bed, 13 feet of iron that proved its owner was the last of his kind. Moses measured it himself. The Hebrew text preserves his astonishment. 9 cubits long, 4 cubits wide, iron construction when bronze still ruled warfare. The bed rested in rubber, displayed like a war trophy. Evidence of the impossible made real. King Og of Bashan slept in that bed, the last sovereign of the Rephaim. Ancient texts call him the remnant of giants, the sole survivor of races that predated Israel's existence. His kingdom stretched across 60 cities, each one fortified with walls that touched clouds, gates sized for inhabitants who made normal humans look like children. The name Bashan appears in Ugaritic tablets discovered at Ras Shamra, not as a kingdom, as a cosmic location. The texts place divine councils there, meetings between gods and their messengers. The mountain where heaven touched earth, where divine beings could take physical form, where the Rephaim originated before they became something else. Rephaim means shades in Hebrew, the dead ones, spirits, inhabitants of Sheol. The same word describes both Og's people and the ghostly dead in Isaiah, as if these giants existed halfway between life and death, too solid for spirits, too wrong for mortality. Og's survival through the flood raises questions that make theologians uncomfortable. The book of Deuteronomy states it plainly. Og remained from the remnant of the Rephaim, the giants who should have drowned, who existed before Noah's reign. Moses knew the genealogies, understood the impossibility. Yet there stood Og, ruling 60 cities, commanding armies, sleeping in his iron bed, while the rest of his kind had vanished beneath primordial waters. Jewish commentary suggests underground refuges, deep places where floodwater couldn't reach, cavern systems beneath Bashan's volcanic soil. The region sits atop ancient lava tubes, natural shelters that could preserve giant bloodlines through global catastrophe. Og emerged after the waters receded, found his kingdom empty, rebuilt from nothing. The archaeology of Bashan disturbs researchers. Massive stone construction predates any known civilization. Dolmens weighing 50 tons, stone circles that mirror sites across Europe, architecture that assumes builders could move weight that challenges modern equipment. The locals call them giant graves. Science calls them prehistoric monuments. Neither explains their true purpose. Numbers chapter 21 records the battle in sparse detail. Israel asked for safe passage. Og refused, marched his entire army to Edrei, the last Rephaim king leading forces against escaped slaves. He should have crushed them. Size advantage, fortified cities, knowledge accumulated across centuries. Moses received a direct message. Do not be afraid of him. The command suggests Israel's terror. Veterans who defeated Amorite kings trembled before Og. God himself had to intervene with reassurance. The promise came with specifics. Og would fall. His people would die. His cities would burn. The battle at Edrei ended an age. No prolonged siege. No careful tactics. Israel struck like lightning. Og fell among his soldiers. The text emphasizes complete annihilation. No survivors, no prisoners. Every man, woman, and child in 60 cities. Genocide so thorough that archaeologists find only ash layers where Rephaim culture once flourished. The systematic destruction suggests more than military victory. Israel burned libraries, shattered monuments, scattered bones. They erased a civilization that had endured since before the flood. Knowledge that traced back to the Watchers, wisdom that corrupted, power that shouldn't exist in human hands. Og's iron bed survived because Israel couldn't destroy it. Too massive to break, too heavy to throw into fire. They left it in Rabbah as testimony, physical proof of what they'd faced, what they'd overcome, what must never rise again. Rabbah fell to other conquerors. The bed vanished into history. But its memory preserves measurements that make anthropologists calculate and recalculate. The connection between Bashan and the underworld runs deeper than names. Ancient texts describe it as an entry point, a thin place where barriers failed, where the living could descend to Sheol, where the dead could rise. The Rephaim ruled this boundary zone, not fully alive, not properly dead, existing in spaces between what should and shouldn't be. Psalm 68 calls Bashan the mountain of God, but also the mountain of peaks, many summits, multiple realities. The psalmist describes God shattering enemies there, breaking heads, crushing skulls, violence that seems excessive until you understand what those enemies were, what they represented, why their destruction required divine intervention. The land itself remembers giants. Volcanic soil that shouldn't support agriculture yields impossible harvests. Cattle grow larger there than anywhere in the region, as if the earth absorbed something from its former inhabitants. Genetic potential leaked into groundwater, size echoing through generations of everything that feeds there. Modern Druze communities in the Golan preserve oral traditions about the ancient inhabitants. They speak of beings who built the stone monuments, who could lift what hundreds of men couldn't budge, who stood tall enough to pluck eagles from flight. The stories always end the same way. The giants grew proud, challenged heaven, were destroyed by fire from above. But Og's death meant more than losing one king. He was the last, the final Rephaim with pure bloodline. With him died languages, technologies, memories that stretched back to when divine beings walked openly on earth. His kingdom of 60 cities held libraries we'll never read, sciences we'll never recover, histories that would rewrite human origins. The tactical implications of fighting giants shaped Israeli warfare for generations. Speed over strength, slings over swords, mobility over fortification. They learned from battling Og. That size brought weakness. That giants moved slowly, turned poorly, fell hard. David would apply these lessons to Goliath, but David faced a degraded echo of what Og had been. The measurements matter because they're all we have left. 9 cubits, 4 cubits, numbers that translate to 13.5 feet long, 6 feet wide. A bed for a being who needed support normal furniture couldn't provide. Iron because wood would splinter. Displayed because destruction was impossible. Rabbinic tradition adds details scripture omits. Og possessed weapons forged before the flood, armor that turned bronze like cloth. Knowledge of metal alloys lost when the Watchers fell. He taught his smiths fragments of celestial metallurgy, enough to forge iron when the world still used bronze, not enough to save his kingdom when Moses arrived. The systematic nature of Og's destruction reveals Israelite fear. They didn't just defeat an enemy, they performed cultural exorcism, burned texts that might preserve giant bloodlines, shattered breeding records, scattered genealogies. ensured no future generation could reconstruct what they'd destroyed. The thoroughness speaks to trauma, to facing something so fundamentally wrong that its complete erasure became religious duty. Underground cities riddle the Golan Heights. Modern exploration finds tunnels too low for comfort, chambers that require crawling, but ancient collapses suggest original dimensions far larger. Passages sealed by earthquakes, rooms filled with debris, architecture that once accommodated residents who couldn't use normal human spaces. The absence of Rephaim remains frustrates archaeology. We find their cities, their monuments, their dolmens, but no bones, no graves, no physical evidence of the giants themselves. As if Israel's destruction included scattering remains so thoroughly that reassembly became impossible, or as if the Rephaim were never fully physical to begin with. Og's connection to pre-flood knowledge explains Israel's terror. He remembered. Not stories passed down through generations, personal memory of the world before water cleansed it, of technologies that corrupted, of power that destroyed, of the reasons God drowned a planet. That knowledge died with him at Edrei, the last witness to humanity's first apocalypse. The biblical text treats Og's death as a turning point. After him, no more pure giants. The Anakim were already degraded. Goliath's brothers showed mutations. The clean bloodlines that traced back to the Nephilim ended in Bashan. What followed were echoes, diluted strains, genetic shadows of the original horror. The land of Bashan still unsettles. Israeli soldiers patrolling the Golan report equipment malfunctions. Compasses spin, radios fill with static, satellites show magnetic anomalies. As if the earth itself remembers what once ruled there, what died there, what might still linger in spaces between the living and the dead. But while Middle Eastern giants left weapons and fortresses, across the Atlantic, giants left something else. Thousands of skeletons that newspapers reported, museums catalogued, and then somehow lost. The Wisconsin farm boy's shovel hit bone on a clear April morning in 1912. He was digging a new well. The skull that emerged could have served as a wash basin. Local newspapers rushed reporters to the scene. The Lake Delavan discovery would make headlines across the nation. 18 skeletons emerged from that ancient burial mound. The smallest stood 7 feet 6 inches. The largest stretched beyond 10 feet. Double rows of teeth lined massive jaws. Skulls showed pronounced ridges above the eye sockets. These weren't just tall humans. The New York Times ran the story without skepticism. Matter-of-fact reporting, measurements, locations, names of witnesses. No different from covering a train accident or political scandal. Giant skeletons were news, not myth. The paper of record didn't question their existence any more than it questioned yesterday's weather. Between 1850 and 1950, American newspapers documented over 1,000 giant skeleton discoveries. Not tabloid rags, respected publications, the Street Paul Pioneer Press, the Arizona Republican, the Toronto Daily Telegraph. Each story followed the same pattern. Construction or farming disturbs ancient mound. Massive bones emerge. Local authorities arrive. Smithsonian representatives appear. Skeletons vanish into museum collections. Then silence. Complete archival emptiness where thousands of bones should exist. The Smithsonian's own annual reports from the early 20th century contain damning admissions. They reference aberrant skeletons sent to Washington. Crates of oversized remains received from field excavations, detailed catalogues that suddenly stopped mentioning giants after 1920, as if institutional memory underwent selective editing. Ralph Glidden excavated Catalina Island from 1919 to 1928. His photographs show him standing next to skeletons that dwarf his 6-foot frame. Hundreds of giant remains pulled from ancient burial sites. He sold many to museums, kept meticulous records. Today, not one of his giants can be found in any collection. The photos remain. The bones vanished like morning fog. Native American oral traditions speak clearly about red-haired giants. The Paiute call them Siteka, cannibals who raided villages, stole women, devoured children. The tribes united in rare cooperation to drive these giants into Lovelock Cave. sealed the entrance, set fires, burned them alive. The screams echoed for days. Lovelock Cave excavations in 1912 found exactly what Paiute legends predicted: burned skeletons, red hair preserved by the dry Nevada climate, skulls with double rows of teeth. The initial reports described 7-foot mummies. Later editions revised the height downward. Modern museum displays claim no giants were found, but local newspapers from 1912 tell different stories. Skeletons, 8 to 10 feet tall, artifacts sized for enormous hands, all disappeared into private collections or museum storage. Abraham Lincoln knew about the giants. His 1848 speech to Congress referenced the bones of an extinct race of giants that once inhabited America. Not legend, not speculation. Bones. Physical evidence the future president had seen or received reliable reports about. Lincoln was many things, but never careless with facts. The mound builders left more than dirt piles across North America. Their earthworks encode astronomical alignments, mathematical principles, engineering knowledge that challenges assumptions about prehistoric Americans. Inside these mounds, excavators consistently found the same thing: layers of normal burials. Then deeper, older layers containing enormous skeletons, as if two different species shared the continent. Government involvement appears in disturbing patterns. The Bureau of Ethnology, predecessor to parts of the Smithsonian, sent agents to every major giant discovery. They arrived with federal authority, removed bones, silenced witnesses, paid for silence when necessary, threatened legal action when payment failed. Professional archaeologists learned to stop reporting giant finds. The Powell Doctrine explains the cover-up without naming it. John Wesley Powell, founding director of the Bureau of Ethnology, established clear policies. American prehistory must support manifest destiny. Native Americans must appear primitive to justify European conquest. Nothing could suggest advanced ancient civilizations in North America, especially not civilizations of giants that predated both natives and Europeans. Newspaper accounts reveal consistent physical details: height between 7 and 12 feet, massive jawbones, double rows of teeth in many specimens, 6 fingers and 6 toes appearing regularly. The same mutations described in biblical accounts of giants. The same degraded genetics. The same evidence of hybrid bloodlines failing across generations. Ohio farmers alone uncovered hundreds of giant skeletons. The Connaught area became famous for its enormous mound builder remains. Aaron Wright discovered bones in 1800 that triggered scientific interest. Skulls that could fit over normal human heads like helmets. Femurs used as walking canes by average-height men. Teeth worn flat from grinding food normal human jaws couldn't process. The 1883 Scientific American carried multiple giant skeleton reports without skepticism. The journal that debunked perpetual motion machines and exposed fraudulent inventions treated giant remains as established fact. They published measurements, locations, professional assessments. The same publication today won't acknowledge these articles existed. Minnesota's giants showed technological sophistication. Copper armor covered skeletons in Grand Rapids area mounds, not crude hammered metal, carefully crafted protection sized for warriors 8 feet tall. The copper came from Lake Superior sources. The craftsmanship exceeded anything Native Americans were supposed to have produced. The armor disappeared into museum collections. The giants wearing it vanished even faster. West Virginia produced the most disturbing finds. The Grave Creek Mound yielded skeletons with inscribed tablets, writing that predated any known American script, giants who left messages, who possessed literacy, who encoded information in languages no modern scholar admits to recognizing. The tablets went to the Smithsonian. They've never been displayed or discussed in official publications. Professional archaeologists developed selective blindness. James Churchward excavated extensively in the Midwest. His field notes describe numerous giant encounters. His published works never mention them. Private letters reveal the pressure, career-ending threats, funding withdrawn, excavation permits revoked. The message was clear: report giants and lose everything. The Smithsonian's storage facilities tell their own story. Researchers requesting access to 19th century collections hit walls of bureaucracy, forms that lead nowhere, permissions that never arrive. Storage areas declared off-limits for reorganization that lasts decades. As if certain collections were never meant to resurface, California newspapers documented giants along the entire coast. From San Diego to the Oregon border, construction projects hit ancient burials. The skeletons emerged wearing shell jewelry, holding stone tools sized for massive hands, arranged in burial patterns suggesting complex death rituals. Every major discovery followed the same pattern: local excitement, scientific interest, federal intervention, complete disappearance. The 1895 Oroville Mercury reported the nation's tallest giant, 12 feet high, discovered by miners following a gold vein. The skeleton wore a copper crown, held stone weapons that required 2 normal men to lift. The find should have revolutionized American archaeology. Instead, it vanished so completely that modern researchers question if the newspaper account was fiction. Except dozens of witnesses signed affidavits, their descendants still live in Oroville. 1897 brought the most credible witness to American giants. Professor Thomas Wilson, curator of prehistoric anthropology at the Smithsonian, publicly acknowledged that the museum held multiple giant skeletons. His successor destroyed those public statements, claimed Wilson was misquoted. But Wilson's personal notes survive in private collections. They describe examining femurs over 4 feet long, skulls with brain capacity 30% larger than modern humans. Physical evidence of American giants stored in the nation's premier scientific institution. The timing of the cover-up matters. It began just as evolution theory gained scientific acceptance. Giants didn't fit the narrative. They suggested multiple human species, catastrophic changes, biblical accounts verified by physical evidence. Academic careers depended on gradual evolution, steady progress from primitive to advanced. Giants broke the model, so giants had to disappear. 1920 marked the turning point. After that date, no major museum acknowledged giant skeletons, no university studied them, no journal published findings. As if a switch flipped in institutional memory. Before 1920, giants were scientific fact. After 1920, giants became mythology. Modern ground-penetrating radar reveals untouched mound-builder sites. Technology shows burial chambers, large voids suggesting intact remains, but excavation permits are denied. Sites declared protected. Development projects rerouted, as if authorities know what waits underground and prefer it stays buried. The DNA revolution should have solved the mystery. Giant bones mean giant DNA, testable genetic evidence of who these beings were, where they originated, how they relate to modern humans. But accessing pre-1920 skeletal collections proves impossible. Requests disappear, samples get contaminated, results come back inconclusive. The same institutions that map Neanderthal genomes claim they can't locate American giant remains. Native American repatriation laws provide convenient cover. Skeletons must be returned to tribes, except no tribe claims the giants. Oral traditions explicitly separate these beings from honored ancestors. The red-haired cannibals were enemies, invaders, monsters that required tribal unity to destroy, but laws written to protect native heritage now shield giant remains from examination. Freedom of Information Act requests reveal classified Smithsonian documents, sealed archives, restricted collections, national security exemptions for archaeological materials. Why would century-old bones require security classifications? Unless those bones prove something that undermines carefully constructed historical narratives. The pattern extends beyond America. Canadian giants disappeared into the Royal Ontario Museum. Mexican giants vanished into government collections. South American giants entered private European collections and never emerged. A hemispheric effort to erase evidence. Coordinated institutional amnesia. Global archaeological conspiracy sounds absurd until you document the disappeared evidence. 1950 marks the last credible newspaper account of American giants. After that, only tabloids carried such stories. Legitimate media learned the lesson. Report giants and lose credibility. Face ridicule. Watch careers evaporate. The transformation from scientific fact to fringe theory took only 30 years. One human generation to erase memories that spanned millennia. Modern archaeologists won't discuss the early reports, won't explain the disappearances, won't address why their predecessors documented thousands of giants that vanished from history. They've learned institutional survival requires selective memory. Careers depend on not finding what shouldn't exist. Each vanished skeleton carried DNA that could rewrite human origins. Bones that could prove or disprove ancient texts. Physical evidence of humanity's true past. That evidence filled crates in museum basements, sat in storage rooms, waited for technologies that could unlock their secrets, then disappeared as those technologies emerged. The cover-up required cooperation across competing institutions. Museums that fought for funding united to hide giants. Universities that battled for prestige agreed to forget. Government agencies with conflicting missions coordinated suppression. The scale suggests the truth threatened something fundamental, something that justified abandoning scientific principles to preserve acceptable history. Descendants of witnesses still remember. Rural communities preserve stories of the day giants emerged from ancient mounds. Children grew up hearing about bones that dwarfed their fathers, about federal agents who paid in cash and threatened in private, about truths buried deeper than any mound builder grave. The American giants vanished into museum basements, but in Europe, archaeologists were unearthing something else. Ice Age humans so massive that they rewrote the textbooks temporarily. The skeleton lay perfectly preserved in Italian permafrost for 30,000 years. When archaeologists measured it, they fell silent. At 6 feet 5 inches, this Ice Age hunter towered a full foot above his contemporaries. The year was 1998, northern Italy. A construction crew breaking ground for a new highway cut through ancient sediment. Their bulldozer blades scraped against something that shouldn't exist at that depth. Bone gleamed white through dark soil. The foreman called archaeologists. Standard protocol for Italian construction. They expected another Roman burial. They found something infinitely older. Dr. Paolo Giunti arrived at dawn. His team established a grid. Brushes swept away millennia of accumulated earth. The skeleton emerged like a revelation. Every measurement defied Ice Age norms. The skull showed pronounced brow ridges. The jaw could crack bones that would shatter modern teeth. But the height stopped conversation cold. Gravettian culture flourished between 34,000 and 24,000 years ago. They hunted mammoths across glacial Europe, created Venus figurines, invented technologies that wouldn't reappear for 20,000 years. Archaeologists thought they understood these people. Average height 5 feet 4 inches. Stocky builds adapted for Ice Age survival. Then Italy's permafrost preserved the impossible. The giant wasn't alone. His grave goods revealed a culture obsessed with scale. Mammoth ivory jewelry covered the skeleton. Not small pendants. Massive torques that required killing full-grown bulls. Beads carved from single tusks. Each piece would break a normal human's neck. The burial screamed status, power, membership in something beyond normal Gravettian society. Statistical analysis shattered comfortable assumptions. In a population where 5 feet 6 inches was remarkably tall, 6 feet 5 inches was impossible. The math didn't work. Genetic drift couldn't explain it. Nutritional advantage fell short. The skeleton represented something outside normal human variation. The kind of outlier that makes scientists check their measurements, then check again. His bones told stories that rewrote prehistory. Muscle attachments showed strength that belonged in anatomy textbooks under theoretical maximum. The femur's thickness suggested weight no Ice Age diet could support. Unless he had access to calories, others didn't. Unless he hunted differently. Unless he wasn't quite like his smaller companions. Carbon dating confirmed the age. 30,000 years before present, the height of Gravettian culture. When cave paintings reached artistic peaks not matched until the Renaissance, when humans invented technologies that archaeology can't explain, when giants walked among normal men, and left traces in permafrost. The DNA extraction should have been routine. Ancient genetic material survives in permafrost. Scientists have sequenced older specimens. The giant's bones contained plenty of preserved tissue. But something went wrong. Contamination, the reports claimed. Multiple attempts failed. The genetic evidence that could explain his impossible size vanished into laboratory error every single time. More Gravettian giants emerged from archaeological shadows. A skull from Predmusti measured 30% larger than normal. Femurs from Dolny Vestonice belonged to individuals approaching 7 feet. Each discovery individually dismissible as statistical outliers. Together they formed a pattern. The Gravettians included a giant caste that archaeology preferred to ignore. Their hunting techniques defied logic until you factored in their size. Gravettian sites contain mammoth bones in quantities that suggest industrial-scale slaughter. Not opportunistic scavenging, systematic hunting, entire herds driven over cliffs, mass kill sites with hundreds of mammoth skeletons. Archaeology credits this to group coordination. But ethnic Siberians who still hunt mammoths tell different stories. They speak of ancestors who could match a mammoth's strength, who could drive spears through hide that turns modern bullets. The giants' tools survive better than their bones. Spear points too heavy for normal use. Stone blades that require 2 hands just to lift. Archaeologists label them ceremonial. Too large for practical application, except wear patterns show extensive use. Blood residue proves they killed. These weren't ritual objects. They were weapons for hands that matched their scale. Brain capacity measurements shock more than height. The Italian giant's skull held 200 cubic centimeters more than modern humans. Not just bigger, fundamentally different brain architecture. The same expansion appears in other Gravettian giants, as if increased size came with increased neural complexity, or as if neural complexity enabled the size. Gravettian art reveals their self-perception. Cave paintings show human figures in 2 distinct sizes. Tall hunters surrounding mammoths, smaller figures watching from safe distances. The proportions match skeletal evidence. 10 normal humans for every giant. A breeding population that maintained specific ratios, that knew their differences, that preserved them in art. The Venus figurines gain new meaning in this context. Exaggerated female forms, massive hips, breasts that defy gravity. Archaeologists call them fertility symbols. But what if they're portraits? What if Gravettian giants needed mates who could birth giant children? What if the figurines show real women, not symbolic ideals? Genetic markers in modern Europeans trace back to 3 founding populations: Mesolithic hunter-gatherers, Neolithic farmers, Bronze Age steppe herders. The Gravettians don't fit any category. Their DNA should flow through European bloodlines, should appear in genetic surveys. Instead, they vanished without genetic trace, as if they never bred with normal humans, or as if their hybrid offspring couldn't survive. The pattern extends beyond Europe. Gravettian technology appears suddenly worldwide, the same tool types, the same art styles, the same burial practices. Archaeologists invoke parallel development, independent invention. But what if Gravettian giants spread these technologies? What if their size allowed migrations normal humans couldn't attempt? Isotope analysis of giant bones reveals impossible diets, protein levels suggesting pure carnivory, calcium indicating massive bone consumption, prey species that fought back, that required strength to subdue. The giants ate like apex predators because they were apex predators. They hunted what others feared, survived where others starved. The climate data adds another layer. Gravettian giants thrived during the coldest period of the last ice age, when temperatures dropped so low that glaciers reached Central Europe. When normal humans huddled in caves, giants hunted the frozen steppes. Their size was adaptation, their strength was survival. Until the climate changed. The warming period that ended the Ice Age coincided with giant disappearance. As glaciers retreated, giants vanished. Not gradually, simultaneously across their range. The last giant burials date to 24,000 years ago. Then nothing. No intermediate forms. No size reduction over generations, complete disappearance, as if changing climate triggered something more than habitat loss. Cave art from the transition period suggests conflict. Paintings show smaller humans fighting taller ones, spears flying, bodies falling, the peaceful coexistence of earlier art replaced by warfare, by images of giants fleeing, of normal humans pursuing, of victories celebrated in red ochre and charcoal. Modern archaeological politics suppresses giant research. Papers describing oversized Gravettian skeletons face unusual peer review hurdles. Funding disappears. Dig permits get revoked. The Italian giant made headlines briefly, then vanished from academic discussion, as if certain topics were marked off limits, as if giant evidence threatened established narratives. Private collections tell different stories. European nobles collected giant bones for centuries. Castle vaults contain femurs labeled as dragon bones. Skulls attributed to monsters. Medieval catalogues describe them clearly. Human remains of impossible size, found in ancient graves, preserved as curiosities, hidden when science grew too sophisticated to accept their implications. The Gravettians' advanced technology makes sense only with giant innovators. They created tools that required enormous strength to manufacture, developed hunting strategies that assumed superhuman capabilities, built societies around size differences that archaeology prefers to minimize. Their giants weren't anomalies. They were integral, essential, the engine that drove Gravettian success. Neanderthal interactions with giants haunt the genetic record. Gravettian sites contain Neanderthal tools, trade goods, evidence of contact. But Neanderthal DNA shows stress markers during Gravettian expansion, population bottlenecks, forced migrations, as if the giant's arrival triggered Neanderthal decline, as if two predator species couldn't share territory. The Venus of Willendorf gains darker meaning. Found in a Gravettian context, carved from limestone not local to the area, carried hundreds of miles. The figure's exaggerated proportions match no known human population. Unless those proportions were real, unless the carver worked from life, unless we're looking at a giant woman through Gravettian eyes. Moravian sites preserve evidence other locations lost, mass graves containing individuals of varied heights, giants buried alongside normal humans, but always in dominant positions, always with richer goods, always oriented to suggest leadership, social hierarchy based on physical size, genetic castes that prehistory wasn't supposed to have. The disappearance pattern matches other extinctions, rapid climate change, habitat loss, prey species vanishing, but also human agency, deliberate hunting, systematic elimination. The same pattern that would replay with American giants, with biblical giants, with every population that grew too large for normal humans to tolerate. Cave paintings from the final period show giants alone. No normal human figures, just tall hunters pursuing vanished prey across empty steppes, the last artwork of dying breed, self-portraits of extinction. The Gravettians' giants saw their end coming, recorded it in stone, left testimony that survives in caves too deep for tourists. European museums store Gravettian giants in basements. Boxes labelled with site names and dates, never displayed, never discussed. Budget line items for anomalous specimens. The same institutional amnesia that swallowed American giants. The same coordinated silence, as if something about these bones threatens more than academic theory. The Gravettians vanished without descendants, but in Philistine cities, a giant bloodline survived for centuries, until one terrifying night when David's warriors hunted them to extinction. 2 Samuel lists something historians skip. After Goliath's death, David's men killed 4 more giants from the same family. The last one wielded a spear so massive that 3 normal men couldn't lift it. The text names them clearly: Ishbi-Benob, Saph, Lami, and the 6-fingered warrior whose name scripture doesn't preserve. 4 brothers who shared Goliath's blood. 4 champions who fell to Israeli swords. 4 pieces of evidence that Gath bred giants like other cities bred soldiers. Ishbi-Benob struck first. The account places him at Gob, cornering an exhausted David. The king's sword arm trembled with fatigue. Age had stolen the speed that once dropped lions. The giant's bronze spearhead weighed 300 shekels, half of Goliath's 600, but still impossible for normal warriors. New armor covered Ishbi-Benob's frame. Scales that had never tasted battle, fresh, forged for killing kings. Abishai arrived as the spear descended. David's nephew moved with desperate precision. His blade found gaps between armor plates. Bronze rang against iron as the giant toppled. 300 shekels of spearhead buried in dirt meant for David's skull. The king lived because someone else was faster, because age hadn't claimed Abishai's reflexes, because Gath's second champion underestimated Hebrew loyalty. The death triggered something savage in David's remaining years. He established a new military unit, giant killers, warriors trained specifically to fight beings twice their height, speed drills, sling accuracy, techniques for hamstringing opponents who stood beyond sword reach. The king who'd faced Goliath with faith now approached giants with calculated violence. Saph fell at the next battle of Gob, another giant from Gath's warrior bloodline. The text gives his death one verse, no details, no drama, just a name and location. Sibbecai the Hushathite killed him. The sparse account suggests routine execution, as if slaying giants had become military procedure, as if Hebrew soldiers had learned to see them as problems requiring specific solutions. Archaeological evidence from Philistine cities reveals why giants concentrated there. Doorways cut 12 feet high throughout residential districts, not just palaces or temples, standard construction. Ceiling heights that assume residents who look down on normal humans. Streets widened to accommodate larger foot traffic. Architecture designed for mixed populations where size varied dramatically. The breeding programs left traces in burial practices. Philistine cemeteries show careful separation, normal-sized remains in standard plots, oversized skeletons in special sections, sometimes surrounded by smaller skeletons arranged like attendants or sacrifices. The giant dead received different treatment. Different goods, different orientations, as if death didn't end their distinction. Gath's metalworking quarter tells its own story. Furnaces larger than contemporary sites, anvils that required multiple operators, molds for weapons no human could swing. The city specialized in equipping warriors whose size demanded custom everything. Armor thick enough to turn bronze, swords balanced for 11-foot frames, spears that normal soldiers used as siege equipment. The third brother died defending his family's patron city. Scripture calls him Goliath, creating confusion. Some manuscripts name him Lami, brother of Goliath. The Hebrew text tangles here. Scribal errors or deliberate obfuscation. Either way, Elhanan, son of Jair, killed a giant whose spear shaft matched the famous weaver's beam description. The same weapon type, the same impossible scale, the same futility against Hebrew tactics. Elhanan's victory deserves more attention than Scripture provides. He wasn't royalty like David, wasn't part of the mighty men, just a soldier who killed a giant and earned one verse in the record. His anonymity suggests how routine giant killing had become, how David's spectacular faith victory had evolved into military doctrine, how Hebrew armies had industrialized the impossible. The fourth brother broke the pattern in every way. 6 fingers on each hand, 6 toes on each foot, 24 digits total. The mutation that marked genetic instability. That revealed inbreeding's toll. That showed the giant bloodlines collapsing under their own weight. He taunted Israel like his brothers, stood between armies. Demanded single combat. Relied on traditions that had died with Goliath. Jonathan, son of Shimei, accepted the challenge. David's nephew faced David's nightmare. But 40 years had passed since a shepherd boy trembled before bronze and blasphemy. This Jonathan grew up knowing giants could die, had trained under men who'd killed them, carried weapons designed for exactly this moment. The 6-fingered giant fell like his brothers. Another verse. Another death, another Gath champion feeding battlefield ravens. The systematic execution speaks to Hebrew rage. These weren't random battlefield encounters. David's forces hunted Gath's giants, targeted them specifically, removed them methodically. Four brothers who might have terrorized a generation reduced to footnotes in someone else's story. The text emphasizes completion. All four dead, no survivors mentioned, no children. The bloodline that produced Goliath ended on Hebrew iron. Philistine military doctrine never recovered. They'd built strategies around giant champions, single combat that demoralized enemies, psychological warfare that won battles before they started. Without giants, they were just another coastal kingdom, with superior technology but inferior numbers. The sea peoples who'd conquered the Mediterranean learned they were only as strong as their tallest warrior. Modern excavations at Tel Zafit continue revealing Gath's giant infrastructure: storage rooms with jars too large for normal use, grinding stones that required mechanical advantage to operate, water systems designed for population segments with different needs. The city remembered giants in every stone, built their entire civilization around accommodating impossible biology. The pottery evidence suggests dietary requirements: massive consumption recorded in broken vessels, storage jars showing wear from repeated filling, cooking implements scaled beyond normal household needs. The giants ate like their size demanded, processed food in quantities that would bankrupt smaller families, required agricultural systems designed to feed catastrophic hunger. Philistine texts remain largely undeciphered: linear A script that predates Greek writing, symbols that might record giant genealogies, names that could trace bloodlines back to Crete, to wherever the sea peoples originated, to genetic experiments that produced warriors too large for the world that birthed them. The script guards its secrets, waits for breakthroughs that might never come. Gath's destruction layers reveal panicked evacuation, valuable goods abandoned, weapons left behind, evidence of flight rather than organized retreat, as if the city's residents knew their protectors had fallen, knew Hebrew armies were coming, knew the age of giants had ended in their streets. The archaeological record shows a city dying from loss of purpose. David aged into paranoia about giants. His instructions to Solomon included warnings: watch the Philistine cities, monitor bloodlines, never allow another champion to rise. The fear outlived the threat, became institutional memory, shaped Israeli policy for generations. The trauma of facing beings that shouldn't exist, of needing divine intervention to level playing fields biology had tilted. The concentration of giants in specific bloodlines raises questions genetics can't answer: dominant traits that should have spread, hybrid vigor that should have created advantages. Instead, isolation, concentration, decline. As if giant genes were incompatible with normal human biology. As if breeding programs could maintain them only through careful selection. As if dilution meant dissolution. Rabbinic sources preserve details scripture omits. The 5 Gath giants studied together, trained in combat schools that adapted Anakim techniques to Philistine technology. Learned languages to taunt enemies effectively, developed personas designed to maximize terror. They were products of systematic preparation, living weapons crafted for specific purposes, until they met soldiers who'd learned to see past size to vulnerability. The microevolution of Hebrew giant killing tactics reads like military innovation, from David's single stone to Abishai's trained intervention, from faith-based solutions to tactical doctrine, from divine dependence to human skill. The progression shows adaptation, learning, institutionalization of knowledge that turned impossible enemies into solvable problems. Philistine culture shifted after losing its giants. Art styles changed. Religious practices evolved. Trade patterns reorganized, as if the giants had been more than military assets. As if they'd shaped entire worldviews. As if their absence required fundamental restructuring of how Philistines saw themselves, saw their place in the world, saw their future without titans to protect them. The biblical account's emphasis on complete destruction feels deliberate. No giant escapes, no bloodline continues, no future threat emerges from Gath. The writers wanted readers to know this particular nightmare had ended, that David's military machine had succeeded where faith alone might have faltered, that systematic violence had erased what divine flooding had failed to destroy. Modern Ashkelon preserves Philistine DNA in unexpected ways. Genetic studies of ancient remains show European markers, Aegean origins, but also anomalies, sequences that don't match known populations, fragments that suggest admixture with something else, something that left traces in Philistine bloodlines before vanishing, before David's men completed their work. The silence after the fourth giant's death echoes through scripture. No more champions emerge, no more morning taunts, no more battles decided by single combat between mismatched opponents. Just normal warfare between normal armies, as if removing giants had stripped something essential from conflict, had reduced war to mere killing without cosmic significance. Philistine giants fell to Israeli swords, but across the ancient world, monuments too massive for human hands suggest their cousins built civilizations we still can't explain. The dolmen's capstone weighs 160 tons. Modern cranes would struggle to place it. Yet someone positioned it perfectly atop vertical stones 5,000 years ago, and local legends insist that someone stood 15 feet tall. Brittany's coastline bristles with megalithic monuments. 6,000 stones march in perfect rows at Karnak. Each one weighs between 10 and 300 tons. Archaeologists date them to 4,500 BCE. Stone Age farmers supposedly erected them, farmers who hadn't invented the wheel. The mathematics destroy conventional explanations. Moving a 50-ton stone requires 500 men with ropes. Lifting it vertical needs wooden frameworks that Bronze Age tools couldn't build. Positioning it precisely demands engineering knowledge we assume they lacked, unless the builders possessed strength that matched their ambitions. Every culture with megaliths tells identical stories. Ireland's giants threw stones across channels. Malta's giants carved temples from solid rock. Easter Island's giants walked statues into position. Peru's giants fitted stones so perfectly that knives can't penetrate the joints. Different languages speaking the same impossible truth. Newgrange predates the pyramids by 500 years. Its corbelled roof hasn't shifted a millimeter in 5 millennia. The passage aligns with winter solstice, sunrise, to within minutes of arc. Someone calculated celestial mechanics. Someone moved 200,000 tons of stone. Someone built for eternity and succeeded beyond human capability. The stones remember their builders in ways that disturb researchers. Acoustic analysis reveals frequencies human ears can't detect. Ultrasound resonance between carefully spaced stones. Infrasound waves that affect human consciousness. The builders tuned their monuments like instruments, created architecture that sings in voices too low for normal hearing, but perfect for beings whose larger vocal cords produce deeper tones. Ground-penetrating radar at Stonehenge found something archaeologists won't discuss publicly. Beneath the visible monument lies another structure, older, larger, built from stones that dwarf the surface ring. The deepest readings suggest humanoid shapes, skeletons too large for official acknowledgement, too dangerous for excavation permits. European megaliths share construction techniques with sites across oceans. Sacsayhuaman's walls in Peru match stonework at Mycenae. Baalbek's trilithon stones mirror techniques used in Britain. The same polygonal fitting, the same acoustic properties, the same reports of giant builders. As if one culture spread this knowledge, one race that could cross continents when humans hugged coastlines. The Karnak alignments make sense only from elevated viewpoints. The patterns resolve into astronomical markers when viewed from 15 feet above ground. Normal human eye level sees random stones. Giant eye level sees star maps, calendars, navigation tools encoded in granite. The builders designed for their own perspective. Local folklore preserves memories archaeology rejects. Breton grandmothers tell children about the Corrigans, the original builders who stood tall as trees, who could lift what villages couldn't budge, who sang stones into position with voices that shook the earth. Mythology, officials claim. Except the stone's acoustic properties match the legends. Skeletal remains near megaliths show consistent patterns. Normal-sized humans from later periods. Then, in the deepest layers, bone fragments of unusual thickness, femurs that supported exceptional weight. Skull pieces suggesting brain cases 30% larger than average. Always fragmentary, never complete, as if someone shattered the evidence deliberately. The dating anomalies multiply with each new test. Radiocarbon dates the organic material between stones to established periods, but luminescence dating of the stones themselves yields impossible ages. 20,000 years, 40,000, numbers that place construction in the Ice Age, when giants supposedly couldn't exist, when humans supposedly lived in caves. Modern experiments in megalith moving fail spectacularly. Teams using ancient Egyptian techniques can't budge stones a fraction of Stonehenge's size. Wooden rollers splinter, ropes snap, earth ramps collapse. The physics work on paper, but fail in practice. Unless you factor in workers 3 times normal strength, then the impossible becomes merely difficult. The Mediterranean holds the most disturbing evidence. Malta's hypogeum descends 3 levels underground, carved from solid limestone 3,500 years before Christ. The acoustic properties defy explanation. Voices carry perfectly between chambers, separated by solid rock. Specific frequencies trigger resonance throughout the complex. Oracle chambers where giants could speak to assembled humans, where size became divine authority. The builders vanished without explanation. One generation creating impossible monuments, the next generation gone. No gradual decline, no cultural evolution, just absence. As if something erased them between sunrise and sunset, as if their time had ended, as if smaller humans inherited what they couldn't have built. Göbekli Tepe in Turkey rewrites prehistory, 11,000 years old, predating agriculture, predating pottery, predating everything civilization supposedly requires. Yet someone quarried 50-ton pillars, carved elaborate reliefs, arranged them in perfect circles, then deliberately buried it all. Preserved evidence of capabilities that shouldn't have existed. The carvings show curious proportions, human figures next to animals, but the humans stand twice the height the animals suggest. Either the carvers had no sense of scale, or they recorded what they saw. Humans who matched their monuments, who could wrestle the aurochs they depicted, who justified the massive architecture through massive presence. Sardinia's Nuraghi towers use stones no modern equipment can replicate positioning for. 7,000 towers built between 1800 and 700 BCE, each one requiring engineering that challenges current capabilities. Local legends say the giants built them in single days, worked through nights, competed to see who could stack stones highest. Games for beings who found ton weights trivial. The vanished builders left tools that archaeology misclassifies. Hammerstones too heavy for human use labeled as ceremonial. Copper chisels requiring giant hands dismissed as votive offerings. Measuring devices scaled for beings twice normal height explained as symbolic representations. The evidence hides in plain sight, mislabeled to fit acceptable narratives. Russia's dolmens contain the most explicit evidence. Caucasus mountains hide thousands of megalithic tombs. Some have portholes cut at heights that make no sense for normal humans. Inside, excavators find bone dust, calcium deposits suggesting massive skeletons dissolved by time, chemistry indicating beings whose bones contained different mineral ratios, who were built from different blueprints. The Osirian at Abydos sinks questions deep into Egyptian sand. Massive granite blocks form a structure that predates the temple above it by millennia. Construction techniques that don't match any Egyptian period. Water erosion suggesting age beyond accepted chronologies, as if giants built the foundation, normal humans built above it, each generation forgetting what lay beneath. Nan Madol in Micronesia floats questions on Pacific tides. 92 artificial islands built from columnar basalt. Stones weighing 50 tons moved across open ocean, stacked with precision that defies tropical storms. Local traditions insist the stones flew into place, levitated by giants who sang them across water, who built a city where no city should exist. The global distribution suggests coordination, planning, purpose beyond random monument building. Megalithic sites cluster at specific latitudes, form patterns visible only from altitude, create networks that span continents. as if the builders worked from blueprints we can't read, toward goals we can't comprehend. Forbidden excavations hint at darker truths. Teams that dig too deep lose permits. Researchers who find oversized remains face career destruction. Funding evaporates. Publications reject papers. The same institutional suppression that swallowed American giants, that hides Gravettian evidence, that ensures megalithic builders remain mythological. Ultrasound scanning reveals hollow spaces within megaliths, chambers sealed since construction, voids that could hold answers, but permission to investigate never arrives. Environmental concerns, cultural sensitivities, archaeological politics, excuses that multiply whenever someone might prove giants built these monuments. Each megalith encodes measurements, distances, angles, proportions. The megalithic yard appears globally, 2.72 feet, a measurement that makes no sense for human proportions, but perfect for beings whose stride covered more ground, whose reach spanned greater distances, whose bodies demanded different mathematics. The preservation itself tells stories. These monuments survived conquests, religions, climate changes. Civilizations rose and fell around stones that endured, as if the builders understood deep time. Planned for millennia, created monuments that would outlast their species, that would testify to their existence when bones crumbled to dust. Linguistic analysis of megalithic place names reveals patterns. Root words meaning giant's grave in dozens of languages, independent naming conventions reaching identical conclusions. As if every culture recognized what these monuments represented, who built them, why normal humans could only inherit, never replicate. The stone circles served purposes beyond monument, acoustic focusing created by precise positioning, astronomical observations requiring giant eye height, ceremonial spaces scaled for beings who dwarfed their worshippers, architecture that worked only for its builders, that became mysterious when they vanished. Britain's long barrows hold final evidence, burial mounds stretching hundreds of feet, chambers that could hold giants, most excavated in previous centuries when archaeological standards were loose, when discoveries vanished into private collections, when lords and scholars carted away bones that didn't fit history. Modern ground radar shows what Victorian excavators missed: deeper chambers, larger voids, spaces deliberately sealed before the obvious burials, as if the monuments served two purposes: public tombs for normal dead, hidden chambers for giants who built them, secrets literally buried beneath acceptable archaeology. The builder's disappearance mirrors other giant extinctions: climate change at the end of the Younger Dryas, sea levels rising, landscapes transforming, but also evidence of conflict. Megalithic sites showing fire damage, deliberate destruction, as if normal humans turned on their giant architects, as if the builder's time had passed. Oral traditions preserve what archaeology denies: stories of giants who grew proud, who demanded worship, who took what they wanted until humans united against them. The same pattern from biblical accounts, from Native American legends, from every culture that remembered giants: first awe, then fear, then systematic destruction. The megalithic silence speaks volumes. No written records despite obvious intelligence, no carved genealogies despite monument-building capabilities, no names, no histories, no explanations. As if the builders chose anonymity, or as if their conquerors erased more than bodies, erased memory, erased evidence, ensured only stones would testify to their existence. While megalith builders left stones, the most detailed giant descriptions come from sailors who claimed to meet living giants on uncharted islands. Testimonies the Vatican collected and classified. The Vatican secret archives contain 53 miles of shelving. In 1917, researchers found sailor testimonies describing giants on remote islands. By 1920, those documents vanished into the classified section that requires papal permission to access. Father Giuseppe Bianchi discovered them by accident. He was cataloguing maritime records from the 16th century, Spanish naval logs, Portuguese trade routes, routine documentation of ocean crossings. His hand froze on a bundle marked with the papal seal. Inside lay sworn testimonies that would haunt him until his death. The first account came from Antonio Pigafetta, Magellan's chronicler, December 11, 1520. The fleet had anchored in a Patagonian bay. Pigafetta described a man so tall that the sailors reached only to his waist. Not metaphor, not exaggeration. Precise measurements recorded by a navigator trained in accuracy. The giant danced on the beach. Sand flew from feet that left prints twice the length of European boots. He sang in a voice that shook rigging on ships anchored offshore. When the sailors offered him food, he consumed a basket of biscuits meant to last a week. Water barrels emptied into his throat like teacups. Magellan ordered his men to capture 2 giants. The testimony turns dark here. Iron shackles couldn't hold wrists thicker than masts. The giant's strength bent metal meant for warships. 20 sailors struggled to subdue beings who fought like forces of nature. 1 giant died in chains. The other survived until scurvy claimed him weeks from home. More testimonies filled Father Bianchi's trembling hands. Dutch explorers at Tierra del Fuego, British privateers near the Strait of Magellan. Each account signed by officers who risked careers on truth. The dates spanned 4 centuries, 1520 through 1900, hundreds of separate encounters, different ships, different nationalities, same impossible descriptions. Giants between 8 and 12 feet tall, copper-colored skin, voices that carried for miles, strength that defied physics. Captain John Byron's 1764 testimony included sketches, giants wrapped in guanaco skins, faces painted with geometric patterns. Women who stood 9 feet tall nursing infants the size of European toddlers. The drawings showed careful proportion, scientific observation, details no fantasy would include. The Vatican's collection wasn't random. Father Bianchi found acquisition orders dating to 1614, papal instructions to gather all giant encounters, to pay for testimonies, to silence witnesses when necessary. The Church had been systematically collecting evidence for 300 years, filing it, classifying it, hiding it from the world. Each testimony followed protocols, sworn before priests, witnessed by multiple officers, sealed with wax, delivered to Rome through diplomatic channels. The Church treated giant encounters like state secrets, like threats to doctrine, like truths too dangerous for common knowledge. The Book of Giants fragment changed everything Bianchi believed. Dead Sea Cave 4 had yielded texts the Church thought destroyed, Aramaic descriptions of Nephilim children, their dreams of destruction, their appeals to heaven, their terror as floodwaters rose. The text named names: Gilgamesh, Hobabish, Mawe, giants who left traces in other cultures' myths. But the Patagonian testimonies suggested survival, bloodlines that escaped divine drowning, that found refuge at the world's end, that preserved themselves in lands too remote for ancient floods to cleanse. Josephus had written extensively about post-flood giants. His histories described encounters, measurements, battles. The Church preserved most of Josephus. But the giant chapters existed only in fragments, in references by other authors, in spaces where text should be but wasn't, as if someone had systematically removed evidence while leaving just enough to prove it once existed. The Book of Enoch survived in Ethiopian monasteries because Rome couldn't reach that far. It describes 200 watchers who descended on Mount Hermon, who took human wives, who fathered the Nephilim, who taught forbidden knowledge, weapons, cosmetics, astronomy, the same knowledge that corrupted the world until God drowned it. Enoch names the giant offspring, hundreds of them, their heights, their appetites, their crimes. When they consumed all human food, they turned on humans. The text uses words that make translators uncomfortable: devoured, consumed, fed upon. Not metaphorical hunger, literal cannibalism by beings too large for the world to sustain. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church still reads Enoch as scripture. They preserve what Rome rejected, what councils banned, what theology couldn't reconcile with comfortable faith. Their tradition maintains that some giants survived in remote places, in islands, in deep forests, in lands beyond the edge of maps. Father Bianchi traced the suppression pattern. Early church fathers quoted giant texts freely: Augustine, Origen, Clement, then silence. 4th century onwards, giant references vanish from theology. Texts disappear. Quotes get edited. Official doctrine emerges that giants were only metaphors, only symbols, never real. The 1614 protocol revealed systematic intent. Pope Paul V's secret bull establishing procedures for giant encounters, classification systems, containment strategies, instructions for missionaries who might find giant populations. The document reads like military planning, like the church expected to find living giants, expected to need containment strategies. Spanish conquistadors reported giants throughout the Americas, not myths told by natives, direct encounters. Father Diego de Landa burned Maya codices but preserved his own account of giants in Yucatan. Bones that required 2 men to lift, skulls that served as water basins, the same deliberate preservation of evidence while destroying competing narratives. Portuguese missionaries in Africa filed similar reports. Giants in the Congo, in Ethiopia, in Madagascar, each testimony sealed, shipped to Rome. Added to the growing archive, the church's global reach became a giant detection network. Every missionary a potential witness, every report another file in the classified collection. The suppression extended to art. Medieval churches contained carvings of giants, green men, wild men, beings of impossible size decorating capitals and doorways. The Council of Trent ordered their removal or reinterpretation. Giants became demons. Nephilim became allegories. Physical truths transformed into spiritual metaphors. Galileo's trial makes new sense in this context. The church didn't fear astronomy. They feared what astronomy might reveal: inhabited worlds, other creations. Places where Nephilim bloodlines might have fled, where giants might still rule. The universe had to remain small enough for one flood to cleanse. The Codex Gigas contains hints. Europe's largest medieval manuscript, the Devil's Bible. Created overnight, legend claims, by a monk who sold his soul. The text includes passages about giants that appear nowhere else, descriptions that match Patagonian testimonies, as if the monk had access to classified archives, as if his bargain included forbidden knowledge. Athanasius Kircher knew. The Jesuit polymath's notebooks reference giant bones he examined, measurements he took, conclusions he reached before superiors ordered silence. His published works mention giants only to debunk them. His private papers tell different stories, of skeletons in Vatican basements, of evidence too dangerous to acknowledge. The pattern of acquisition accelerated in the 19th century. As science grew skeptical, the church grew desperate. They bought collections, paid for silence, acquired bones from American mounds, European caves, Asian excavations. The Vatican became a repository for evidence the world wasn't allowed to see. Modern researchers hit walls of classification. Father Bianchi's discovery should have revolutionized history. Instead, his superiors removed him from the archives, reassigned him to parish work. His notes vanished. His health declined. He died claiming the church held proof that would shatter faith, that would reveal humanity's true history. The 1917 date matters. World War I had shattered certainty. Revolution threatened order. The church faced existential crisis. Someone decided to review classified holdings, to assess what secrets justified keeping. Father Bianchi stumbled into that review, saw what centuries of popes had hidden, understood why giants couldn't exist in a world that needed simple faith. The testimonies paint a consistent picture. Giants survived in remote locations into the modern era. Patagonia, Tierra del Fuego, islands unmarked on maps. They avoided civilization, bred in isolation, preserved bloodlines that should have drowned with the Nephilim until explorers found them, recorded them, reported to authorities who classified the evidence. The church's giant protocol remains active. Missionaries still file reports. Anthropologists working in remote areas encounter restrictions. Certain discoveries trigger Vatican interest. Bones disappear. Testimonies get sealed. The same pattern continuing. the same evidence accumulating in archives that require papal permission to access. Digital records create new problems. Satellite imagery that shows impossible settlements, drone footage of beings that don't match known populations, electronic evidence harder to suppress than parchment. The Church adapts, partners with governments, claims cultural protection, ensures that giant evidence remains as mythological as ever. The archives wait beneath Vatican City. Miles of shelving, centuries of secrets, testimonies from sailors who saw impossible beings, reports from missionaries who found Nephilim descendants, evidence that giants didn't vanish with the flood, that they survived, bred, scattered, left traces in remote places until modern civilization erased them or drove them deeper into hiding. Every institution that collected giant evidence reports the same pattern: acquisition, classification, disappearance, the Vatican, the Smithsonian, the British Museum. Coordinated silence across competing organizations, as if something about giants threatens more than history, threatens cosmology, theology, the fundamental assumptions that let us sleep peacefully. Which brings us to the most disturbing question of all. The 1950 directive came wrapped in bureaucratic language. Museums worldwide received identical instructions. Anomalous skeletal remains would transfer to secure storage. Display cases emptied overnight. Textbooks revised between editions. Evidence that had filled public galleries for a century vanished like smoke. Museum directors destroyed careers asking questions. Dr. William Harrison at the British Museum demanded explanations for removing 12 giant skeletons from public display. His termination letter arrived within days. His successor learned the lesson. The giants disappeared into basement vaults marked Special Collections. Access denied without clearance no researcher could obtain. The timing synchronized across institutions: American museums, European galleries, Asian collections. February 1950 saw coordinated removal of giant evidence. Skeletons that had drawn crowds became classified materials. Weapons too large for humans moved to restricted storage. The public lost access to physical proof overnight. But something happened in 1947 that triggered this global suppression. Qumran's caves had protected their scrolls for 2,000 years. When Bedouin shepherds found the first jars, they unleashed more than ancient texts. Cave 4 contained fragments that sent shockwaves through academic circles. Not just biblical variants, not just community rules. Detailed accounts of the Nephilim, their origins, their breeding, their survival methods that contradicted every flood narrative. The Book of Giants emerged piece by piece from Cave 4's darkness. Aramaic text preserved conversations between Nephilim. They knew the flood approached, discussed escape routes, named refuges where water couldn't reach, underground cities, island strongholds, mountain peaks above the deluge line. The giants hadn't passively awaited destruction. They'd planned, prepared, survived. Academic translations sanitized the worst revelations. Where Aramaic used terms for devouring and consumption, English translations read oppression. Where original text described breeding programs, translations mentioned taking wives. The scholars understood what they were reading. They also understood what couldn't be published. The Rockefeller Foundation's involvement raises darker questions. John D. Rockefeller Jr. personally funded major archaeological expeditions through the 1930s and 40s. Every dig that uncovered giant remains. His foundation's money arrived with restrictions. Findings would be properly contextualized. Evidence would be scientifically evaluated. Translation: anything challenging human origins would disappear. Foundation records show suspicious patterns. Expeditions finding giant evidence received immediate funding termination. Archaeological teams got split up. Dig sites were declared exhausted. The money flowed only to researchers who found acceptable history, who dug within approved narratives, who learned to stop reporting anomalous skeletons. Dr. Marcus Webb excavated in Syria from 1946 to 48. His team uncovered a burial complex with passages sized for 10-foot occupants, massive sarcophagi, inscriptions in unknown scripts. His funding evaporated the day he cabled news of the discovery. The site was bulldozed for development. Dr. Webb died in a car accident 3 months later. The pattern repeated globally. Professor Chen Wei in China found giant graves in 1949, terminated from Beijing University. Dr. Sarah Kellner in Peru uncovered oversized mummies, discredited through manufactured scandal. Jean-Pierre Dubois in France located megalithic tombs with intact remains, committed to an asylum. Each researcher who pushed against the new restrictions faced professional or personal destruction. 3 museum curators who refused to comply died within months of each other. Harold Whitmore at Chicago's Field Museum, heart attack at 42. Dr. Elizabeth Hartley at Oxford's Pitt Rivers, drowning accident. Professor Giovanni Russo at Rome's National Museum, fell from a balcony. Each had vocally opposed removing giant exhibits. Each died before they could make their evidence public. Internal memoranda from the period survive in private archives. They speak of maintaining public confidence, of preventing destabilizing revelations, of protecting established timelines, the language of cover-up, dressed in administrative prose. Giants couldn't exist because their existence would unravel too many comfortable assumptions. The DNA revolution terrified the suppressors. Jurassic Park wasn't fiction, it was possibility. Ancient DNA could be extracted, sequenced, compared. Giant bones contained genetic evidence that would prove or disprove their humanity, would reveal their origins, would show whether Nephilim bloodlines were metaphor or biological fact. That potential had to be contained. 1953 brought the most explicit suppression order. The International Council of Museums issued Protocol 7. Any institution holding pre-flood biological specimens would transfer them to designated facilities. The terminology was deliberate. Pre-flood meant they acknowledged the timeline. Biological specimens meant more than bones. They were collecting tissue, hair, anything that might yield genetic material. Storage facilities appeared in remote locations, underground bunkers in Nevada, alpine vaults in Switzerland, island warehouses in the Pacific. Each one operated under military security. Each one received crates from museums worldwide. Each one became a black hole where evidence vanished from scientific access. Dr. Robert Lassen tried to trace the specimens in 1962. The former Smithsonian researcher spent his retirement following paper trails, shipping manifests, storage receipts, transfer orders. He documented 17 separate facilities holding giant remains. His research ended when federal agents confiscated his files. He spent his last years under surveillance, unable to publish his findings. The classification extended beyond physical remains. Photographs disappeared from archives. Field notes vanished from university libraries. Entire archaeological expeditions were erased from institutional memory, as if hundreds of researchers had never existed, as if thousands of discoveries had never happened, as if history itself could be edited. Government involvement went deeper than museum protocols. 1954 Defense Department memoranda discuss anomalous biological remains as national security matters. They worried about public panic. Religious upheaval, social disruption if giant existence became accepted fact. The Cold War provided perfect cover. Everything could be classified for security, even bones that predated nations. Project Blue Sky emerges from declassified fragments, Air Force investigation of historical anomalies, including giant remains. Their 1956 report remains 90% redacted. The visible portions reference genetic evidence of non-human admixture and implications for aerospace medicine. They were studying giants to understand human limitations, to push beyond normal capabilities, to engineer what nature had produced accidentally. The churches knew but stayed silent. Catholic archives reference ongoing containment of Nephilim evidence. Protestant seminaries removed courses on giant theology. Jewish scholars who'd preserved Enoch traditions faced pressure to reinterpret. The religions that should have been most interested in giant evidence united in suppression. Faith required ignorance. Knowledge threatened doctrine. 1960 brought the most sophisticated disinformation. Academic papers debunking giants flooded journals. Careful explanations for every historical account. Mass hallucinations. Misidentified elephant bones. Exaggerated heights through translation errors. Each giant report got individual refutation. The sheer volume of debunking revealed coordinated effort. Independent researchers faced orchestrated destruction. Funding dried up. Publishers refused manuscripts. Colleagues distanced themselves. The message spread through academic networks. Study giants and lose everything. The scientific community that should have demanded evidence learned to avoid questions. Self-censorship replaced official suppression. Television documentaries in the 70s tried breaking through. Producers found doors closing. Networks pulled programs. Sponsors withdrew support. The few shows that aired faced immediate expert debunking. Talking heads explaining why evidence wasn't evidence, why testimony wasn't reliable, why thousands of historical accounts meant nothing. The medium that could have reached millions became another control mechanism. The internet age brought new challenges. Scanned newspaper archives made historical accounts accessible. Witnesses could share suppressed stories. Researchers could collaborate outside institutional controls. The response was sophisticated. Floods of obvious hoaxes discredited real evidence. CGI fakes made genuine photos suspect. Disinformation buried information under mountains of noise. Modern archaeologists inherit ignorance. They genuinely don't know about the confiscated evidence, the destroyed careers, the classification protocols. They've been trained in a system that edited giants from history, that removed anomalies from acceptable research, that created such professional risk around giant studies that no legitimate researcher will touch them. The storage facilities still operate. Satellite imagery shows expansion at several sites, new construction at underground bunkers, increased security at warehouse complexes. They're still collecting, still containing, still ensuring that physical evidence remains locked away. The giant bones wait in darkness. Their DNA degrades. Their testimony silences, their truth buried deeper each year. But cracks appear in the suppression structure. Whistleblowers leak storage locations. Former curators admit to destroyed evidence. Retired officials describe pressure they faced. The infrastructure of suppression ages, becomes harder to maintain, requires more resources to continue. The question becomes not whether the truth will emerge, but when. Current excavations face immediate intervention when they approach sensitive areas. Tel Gath continues uncovering oversized artifacts. Ground-penetrating radar reveals larger structures below, deeper chambers, older foundations. The Israeli team pushes boundaries, tests limits, knows they're approaching something that triggered global suppression. The latest findings from Gath make everything else look small. Armor pieces emerging from destruction layers, weapons that dwarf Goliath's spear, architecture that assumes inhabitants far larger than any biblical account. The excavation approaches revelations that 1950 protocols were designed to prevent, that entire careers were destroyed to hide, that institutions sacrificed credibility to suppress. Something waits beneath Tel Gath that will shatter 70 years of carefully maintained silence. The bones they're approaching don't match any biblical description. The size exceeds scriptural accounts. The implications destroy comfortable histories. What they're finding makes Goliath look like the smallest of his kind. The ground-penetrating radar at Tel Gath screamed warnings in 2021. Dr. Mayer's team had excavated for 16 years since finding Goliath's armor. Now their instruments detected voids beneath the Philistine city, massive chambers, intact structures, architecture that predated everything above it by millennia. The Israeli government intervened within hours. Archaeological permits froze. Military vehicles surrounded the site. The excavation that had revealed a giant's name suddenly faced restrictions no one would explain. Dr. Mayer fought through diplomatic channels. International pressure mounted. After 3 months of negotiations, limited excavation resumed under strict oversight. What emerged from those deeper layers rewrote everything archaeology thought it knew about giants. The first skeleton lay in a stone sarcophagus 20 feet long. Not broken, not scattered, complete, preserved by conditions that defied explanation. The bones gleamed white through accumulated dust. Preliminary measurements suggested a height approaching 15 feet, half again taller than Goliath, older than any Philistine occupation. International teams arrived within days. Geneticists, anthropologists, specialists in ancient DNA extraction. The skeleton offered what 70 years of suppression had prevented. Intact giant remains available for modern analysis. Bone samples that could yield genetic sequences. Proof that would either validate or destroy biblical accounts of the Nephilim. The DNA results leaked through laboratory staff who couldn't stay silent. The skeleton showed markers that shouldn't exist, chromosomal arrangements that broke established patterns, gene sequences that traced to no known human population. The being in that sarcophagus had been partially human. The other part remained unidentified. Here's where the threads of our journey converge into revelation. 10 giants across history, each one marking humanity's encounter with beings that shouldn't exist. The Nephilim who corrupted creation, the Anakim who terrified Moses' spies, Goliath who fell to David's stone, Og who remembered the pre-flood world, American giants who built mounds, Gravettian hunters who dwarfed their prey, the brothers who died in Gath, megalith builders who moved impossible stones, island giants who met European sailors, all of them connected, all of them real, all of them systematically erased from accepted history. The pattern emerges once you see it complete. Every civilization that recorded giants also recorded their destruction. Divine floods, military campaigns, systematic hunts. As if humanity repeatedly faced the same threat, the same contamination, the same need to eliminate beings whose very existence challenged natural order. The suppression reveals more than the evidence itself. Museums don't coordinate global cover-ups for myths. Governments don't classify fairy tales. Academic careers don't end over studying legends. The institutional terror of giant evidence speaks to its reality, to its implications, to what it means for human origins. Current archaeological sites pulse with untapped revelations. Ground-penetrating radar shows giant architecture beneath dozens of locations. Qumran's caves contain unexplored chambers. American mounds hide intact burial complexes. Megalithic sites conceal underground structures. The evidence waits, protected by the same forces that have suppressed it for 70 years. But technology advances. Researchers push boundaries. Truth seeps through cracks in institutional walls. The Tel Gath skeleton changes everything because it exists in the internet age. Images spread before authorities could contain them. Laboratory data leaked through encrypted channels. Scientists around the world analyze findings that official channels would have buried. The 15-foot skeleton becomes undeniable, testable, real in ways that no amount of institutional denial can erase. Religious implications shatter comfortable theologies. If giants existed, if they bred with humans, if they survived floods meant to destroy them, then Scripture records history, not metaphor. The Nephilim were real. Their judgment was necessary. Their contamination required divine intervention. Every major religion must reconcile what their texts actually say with what archaeology now proves. Scientific frameworks crumble equally. Evolution assumes gradual change. Natural selection, survival advantages. Giants break every model. Their size defies physics. Their strength challenges biology. Their existence requires accepting that human history includes chapters science deleted, that our ancestors faced beings whose origins remain unexplained, whose capabilities exceeded natural limits, whose destruction preserved our species. The genetic evidence from Tel Gath opens doors sealed since 1950. Storage facilities holding thousands of giant remains face unprecedented pressure. Freedom of information requests multiply. Whistleblowers emerge from retirement. The infrastructure of suppression, built when authorities could control information, collapses in an age of instant global communication. Native peoples always knew. Their oral traditions preserve what written history erased. Giants who ate human flesh, who required united tribal response, who left monuments we still can't replicate. Indigenous knowledge, dismissed as mythology, contains more truth than academic textbooks. The descendants of those who fought giants remember what universities forced themselves to forget. Modern technology reveals what past excavators missed. Satellite imaging exposes megalithic patterns visible only from orbit. LiDAR penetrates jungle canopies to find giant cities. Underwater scanning locates submerged monuments. Each discovery connects to the others, forms networks, suggests coordination among giant populations that spanned continents. That shared knowledge. That built for purposes we're only beginning to understand. The weapons tell their own story. Every culture that fought giants developed specific tactics: speed over strength, range over proximity, precision strikes against vulnerable points, David's slingstone, Hebrew hamstringing techniques, Native American fire traps. Humanity's survival required learning to kill beings who should have been invincible, required strategies that normal warfare never developed, required unity among peoples who otherwise competed. But the most disturbing evidence comes from the breeding programs. Giants didn't just exist, they were created, maintained, preserved through selective reproduction that traced back to the original corruption. The Nephilim were products of divine beings crossing boundaries. Their descendants carried that transgression in their blood, in their bones, in DNA that archaeology is only now beginning to decode. Storage facility workers describe what waits in classified warehouses, row upon row of giant skeletons, sorted by height, by age, by geographical origin, the evidence of a parallel history, of a competing species, of beings who might have dominated if humans hadn't learned to destroy them. The bones tell stories of violence, of hunts, of extermination campaigns that spanned millennia. The implications for current humanity prove most unsettling. If giant genes survived diluted in normal populations, if recessive traits wait for expression, if the right genetic combination could resurrect what our ancestors tried to destroy, the suppression wasn't just about hiding the past, it was about preventing a future, about ensuring certain bloodlines never converged, never activated, never produced what once required global floods to eliminate. Archaeological teams at sensitive sites now wear radiation badges, report magnetic anomalies, experience equipment failures near giant remains, as if the bones themselves carry some charge, some field, some quality that affects modern technology. The giants weren't just physically different, they were fundamentally other in ways we're only beginning to detect, in ways our instruments weren't designed to measure. The Telgath excavation continues against mounting pressure. Each layer reveals larger structures, older remains, evidence of civilizations that predate accepted chronologies. The team knows they're approaching something that explains why giants concentrated in certain locations, why they built where they built, why their architecture assumes purposes beyond human comprehension. International monitoring increases daily. Satellites focus on the excavation. Intelligence agencies embed personnel. The site that revealed Goliath's name has become ground zero for revelations that threaten established order. That promise or threaten to reveal why giants mattered enough to erase from history, why their existence required coordinated suppression, why the truth waited 3,000 years to emerge. Because somewhere, in unexcavated sites, in protected reserves, in classified locations, the evidence waits. Not just bones, not just artifacts, living proof that giants didn't entirely vanish, that isolated populations survived where humans couldn't reach, that the breeding programs preserved more than memory. Remote sensing detects heat signatures in impossible places. Satellite imagery captures movements that don't match known wildlife. Indigenous peoples speak of valleys where no one goes, of islands unmarked on charts, of places where the old bloodlines found refuge. The age of giants hasn't ended. It's been suppressed, contained, hidden. But truth, like DNA, survives, waits, emerges when conditions align. The giants our ancestors feared haven't vanished into mythology. They've vanished into classifications, into storage facilities, into remote locations where satellites don't scan. into genetic sequences that wait for expression. The question isn't whether giants existed. Tel Gath proves they did. The question is whether they still do. Whether somewhere in Earth's remotest corners, in depths unexplored, in territories forbidden, the bloodlines that produced Goliath found ways to endure. Whether the systematic suppression that hid their bones also hides something more immediate, more present, more dangerous than ancient history. The excavation at Tel Gath approaches answers that 70 years of suppression tried to prevent. What waits in those deepest chambers might explain why giants mattered enough to erase, why their evidence required global coordination to hide, why the truth about humanity's past threatens humanity's future. Some doors, once opened, can't be closed. Some knowledge, once revealed, can't be hidden. Some truths, once spoken, echo forever. The giants are returning, not from death, from classification, from storage, from the deliberate forgetting that preserved our comfortable ignorance. What emerges from Tel Gath's deepest layers will shake archaeology, will challenge faith, will rewrite human origins, will prove that our ancestors' nightmares were memories, that their myths were histories, that their terror was justified. The age of suppression ends where it began, in the ancient dust of cities where giants walked, where their bones wait to testify, where their DNA prepares to speak truths that 70 years of silence couldn't erase. History's greatest cover-up unravels thread by thread. Each revelation connects to the next. Each discovery validates the last. Each piece of evidence builds toward the moment when denial becomes impossible. When institutions must admit what they've hidden. When humanity must confront what our ancestors knew. Giants walked the earth. They bred. They built. They ruled. They fell. They were hidden. And now, in laboratories analyzing DNA that shouldn't exist, in excavations uncovering architecture that defies explanation, in storage facilities where classified bones wait for release, they return. Not as living beings, as truth too large to bury, too real to deny, too important to forget. The giants are rising from the depths of our deliberate amnesia. What they reveal about human origins, about ancient history, about the nature of existence itself, promises to shake the foundations of everything we thought we knew. The time for comfortable myths has ended. The age of terrible truths has begun.